My parents didn't speak to me for 2 years. Then I received a letter from their lawyer, charging me $60,000 for being their daughter. Sophie Bennett was 31 years old when the envelope arrived. It came on a quiet Thursday morning in Seattle. The kind of morning where the sky looked heavy, like it hadn't decided whether to rain or not. Sophie was standing in her small apartment kitchen, waiting for her coffee to brew, when she heard the soft thud of mail dropping through the slot. At first, she didn't think much of it. Bills, ads, junk mail. But then she saw it. A thick cream-colored envelope, sitting on top of everything else. Her full name was printed neatly on the front, Sophie Bennett, and in the upper corner, stamped in bold ink, was something that made her pause. Harrison and Klein, family law attorneys. Sophie's hand stopped midair. For a few seconds, she just stared at it, because she hadn't spoken to her parents in 2 years, 2 months and 6 days. Not since the night she walked out of their house without looking back. Not since her father told her she was dead weight in this family. Not since her mother said nothing at all and let it happen. Sophie slowly picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than normal mail, almost intentional, like it carried more than paper inside it. She carried it to the kitchen table and sat down slowly. Her coffee machine beeped behind her, but she didn't move. For a moment, she considered not opening it, just throwing it away, ignoring like she had ignored everything connected to them for 2 years. But something inside her, curiosity, maybe habit, made her break the seal. Inside was a staple document, 13 pages, and a formal cover letter on top. She read the first line. This office represents Mr. and Mrs. Richard Bennett regarding financial reimbursement of parental expenditures and associated emotional damages. Sophie blinked once, then again. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. What? She whispered. She kept reading. Page 2 listed childhood expenses. Page 3 broke down food and utilities. Page 4 included school supplies and clothing. Page 5 listed medical costs she didn't even remember. Sophie leaned back slightly in her chair. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief. And then, she laughed. A short, sharp laugh at first, then another, because it was absurd. By page 7, she was actually laughing out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was unreal. Because according to this document, her parents were demanding $61,840 for raising her, for feeding her, for clothing her, and somehow even for emotional strain caused by her behavior. Sophie wiped her eyes, still laughing. This can't be real, she said under her breath. But it was. Page 9 made her stop laughing. There was a section titled, Family Reputation Damages. Under it were bullet points like, Emotional distress during holidays, damage to family image in social circles, stress caused by estrangement, embarrassment in front of relatives. And next to each one was a dollar amount. Her mother had literally assigned money to embarrassment. Sophie stared at the page for a long time. The apartment around her felt strangely quiet now. Even her coffee machine had stopped beeping. She slowly set the pages down and leaned back in her chair. After 2 years of silence, this was their message. Not "we miss you," not "are you okay," but an invoice, a legal bill for her childhood. And for the first time since she left them, Sophie didn't feel confused. She felt something much clearer. They hadn't reached out to reconnect. They had reached out to control her again. And this time, they had chosen a lawyer to do it. Sophie looked at the document one more time, then quietly said, "You're actually serious." And that was when she decided this was not going to end the way they expected. Sophie Bennett sat at her kitchen table long after she finished reading the document. The pages were still spread out in front of her, like evidence of something so absurd it didn't fully feel real. Outside, Seattle's rain had started again, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the window in a calm rhythm that didn't match the chaos sitting on her table. She picked up page 4 again, then page 5, and slowly, the shock started turning into something else. Memory. Because this wasn't just numbers on paper. This was her childhood, repackaged, itemized, and priced like a receipt. And suddenly, she was back there. Back in that house outside Chicago, where everything always looked perfect from the outside. White fences, clean driveway, expensive car in the garage, a family that neighbors probably envied. But inside, Sophie remembered something else. Silence, selective attention, conditional love. Her father, Richard Bennett, never raised his voice unless it was about Nathan. Her mother, Elaine, never asked Sophie how she felt unless it was to correct it. And Nathan could break something, fail something, ruin something, and still be praised like he was the center of the universe. Sophie stood up slowly and walked to her kitchen counter. She poured herself water, even though her hands were slightly shaking now. Not from fear, from realization. This wasn't random. This was an emotional outburst. This was planned, organized, approved. Her parents had gone to a law office, sat in front of a lawyer, and said, "We want to charge our daughter." That thought made something twist inside her chest. She walked back to the table and flipped to another page. This one listed household contributions, groceries, electricity, water, even space occupied in family home. Sophie allowed a small, disbelieving laugh again. Space occupied, she repeated, as if she had rented her childhood room, as if being their daughter was a lease agreement. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the table. A known number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A professional male voice came through. "This is David Cole from Harrison and Klein Attorneys. Am I speaking with Sophie Bennett?" Sophie leaned back in her chair. "Yes." A pause. Then, "Have you had a chance to review the documentation sent to you?" Sophie looked at the papers in front of her. "I have." "And?" the lawyer asked carefully. Sophie exhaled slowly, then said the truth. "I laughed." Silence on the line. A long one. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. "Well, I would advise you to take this matter seriously." Sophie's eyes stayed fixed on the document. "Oh, I am," she said quietly. "More than you think." Another pause. "This is a formal financial claim," he continued. "Your parents are requesting repayment within 60 days. Sophie tilted her head slightly. "Or what?" A hesitation again. "Or they may pursue further legal action." That word again. Legal action. As if repeating it enough times made it powerful. Sophie stood up and walked toward the window. Rain was heavier now. The city blurred outside. And she suddenly understood something very clearly. This wasn't about winning in court. It was about pressure, control, fear. They didn't expect her to pay. They expected her to panic, to call, to break, to re-enter the system they had built for her. Sophie looked back at the table, at 13 pages of carefully calculated emotional manipulation, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt done. "Okay," Sophie said into the phone. The lawyer relaxed slightly. "Okay, meaning you will respond?" Sophie smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "but not the way they think I will." A pause. "I'm sorry." Sophie ended the call. No explanation. No argument. Just silence. Then she sat back down at the table and opened her laptop, because now, this wasn't a reaction anymore. This was going to become a response. Sophie Bennett didn't sleep properly that night. Not because she was scared, but because her mind refused to slow down. She sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, the legal documents still open in front of her, laptop glowing beside it. Outside, Seattle was quiet in that heavy, late-night way, where everything felt paused. Even the rain had softened. But inside Sophie's apartment, something had shifted permanently. She wasn't just reading anymore. She was analyzing, line by line, claim by claim, emotion by emotion, and what she discovered was even more disturbing than the document itself. It wasn't random. It was structured manipulation. Every section was designed with intent. First guilt, then memory, then financial pressure. Then emotional responsibility. Her parents weren't just angry. They were strategic. Sophie leaned forward and underlined a sentence on page 8. Parental emotional distress caused by estrangement. She stared at it for a moment, then whispered, "You can't invoice feelings." But apparently, they tried. She opened her laptop and began searching. Legal precedent, family law boundaries, parent-child financial responsibility cases. What she found was immediate and clear. Nothing in the document held legal weight. Not the expenses, not the emotional damages, not the reputation claims. It was all performative. A paper threat dressed as authority. Sophie leaned back in her chair. A slow breath left her. "So this is just intimidation," she muttered. Luna, her cat, jumped onto the table and curled near the edge of the papers like she had been assigned emotional support duty. Sophie rubbed her forehead. It should have felt like relief. But it didn't. It felt like recognition. Because this was not new behavior. It was just the most extreme version of something she had lived with her entire life. Control disguised as care. Expectation disguised as love. Punishment disguised as discipline. Her phone lit up again. Unknown number. Again. This time she didn't hesitate. She answered. Sophie Bennett speaking. A different voice. Older. More formal. "This is David Cole again from Harrison and Klein Attorneys." Sophie exhaled slowly. "I figured." There was a short pause. "I wanted to clarify," he said carefully, "that your parents are willing to resolve this matter privately without escalation if you are open to discussion." Sophie tilted her head. "Discussion about what exactly?" "Repayment terms," he replied. Sophie almost laughed again. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass in slow lines. "Let me ask you something," she said calmly. "Yes. Do you normally send invoices for childhoods, or is this a special case?" Silence. Longer this time. "I understand this may feel unusual," the lawyer started. "No," Sophie interrupted gently. "It doesn't feel unusual." Another pause. "It feels desperate." That word landed differently. Even through the phone line, the lawyer cleared his throat. "Ms. Bennett, I would advise." "I know what you would advise," Sophie said softly. "But I think you already know this won't work." Silence again. Sophie turned back toward the table. 13 pages. One absurd attempt at control, and a lifetime behind it. "This isn't about money," she continued. "It never was." A pause. Then the lawyer asked quietly, "Then what is it about?" Sophie looked at the document one more time, and for the first time, she said it out loud clearly. "Access." Silence. Not even breathing on the other end. "They don't want repayment," she continued. "They want me to react. They want me back in the system where I explain myself, defend myself, feel guilty, and negotiate my own worth." Her voice stayed calm, almost clinical. "And I'm not doing that anymore." The lawyer didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Less confident. "I will pass your response along." "Please do," Sophie said. Then she ended the call. No hesitation. No emotional reaction. Just closure. She set the phone down slowly. And for the first time since receiving the envelope, she didn't feel pulled backward. She felt above it. The document didn't scare her anymore. It revealed them, and that was worse for them than any payment she could have made. Sophie sat back in her chair and started writing something new. Not a defense, not an apology, a response they would never expect. By morning, Sophie Bennett had stopped treating the situation like a shock. It was a case now. Not emotional, not personal. A case. Her laptop was open. The legal document scanned and organized into folders on her screen. Notes filled the margins of a document she had started building overnight. Facts, claims, contradictions, everything neatly structured. Luna sat on the edge of the couch, watching her quietly, as if even the cat understood the shift in energy. Sophie wasn't reacting anymore. She was preparing. Her phone rang again just after 9 a.m. Unknown number. She answered immediately. Sophie. A familiar voice came through. Nathan. Her brother. He didn't sound calm. He sounded irritated. Do you have any idea what you've done? He said without greeting. Sophie didn't move from her chair. I received a document, she replied. I responded. Nathan scoffed. You humiliated them. Sophie blinked slowly. By reading a letter? They're your parents, he snapped. There it was again. That word, as if it erased everything else. Sophie stood up and walked toward the kitchen counter. They chose to send a lawyer instead of talking to me directly, she said calmly. That says enough. Nathan's voice dropped lower. They didn't mean it like that. It was just formal. Sophie let out a small laugh. Formality isn't the issue, Nathan. What is then? He shot back. Sophie paused, then said clearly, dehumanization. Silence. On the other end, Nathan exhaled sharply. You always make everything dramatic. Sophie leaned against the counter. No, she said quietly. I just stopped pretending it's normal. Another pause. Then Nathan's voice hardened. Mom hasn't been sleeping. Dad is furious. This is causing real stress. Sophie tilted her head slightly. And that single word hit harder than anything else she had said. Nathan hesitated. And you should fix it. Sophie stared out the window. Seattle was waking up outside. People walking to work. Cars moving. Life continuing like nothing had happened. She turned back toward the kitchen. I didn't create this situation, she said calmly. They did. Nathan sighed loudly. All they wanted was acknowledgement. That's it. Sophie almost smiled. No, she said. They wanted control dressed as acknowledgement. Nathan went quiet again. Sophie continued before he could interrupt. If they wanted a relationship, they would have called me. If they wanted understanding, they would have talked to me. Instead, they sent numbers. Her voice stayed steady. And now they're upset. I treated it like numbers. Nathan's tone changed slightly. More frustrated. You've changed. Sophie nodded. Yes, she said simply. I stopped negotiating my worth. Silence. A long one. Then Nathan muttered. You're going to regret this. Sophie didn't react. She had heard that line before. From different people. In different forms. Every time she chose herself. I don't think I will, she said softly. And then she ended the call. She didn't block him yet. She didn't need to. Because for the first time, the conversation didn't stay inside her. It passed through her. Without sticking, Sophie returned to her laptop and opened a new document titled Response Summary. She began typing. Not emotion, not anger, just structure. Because she had finally understood something very important. They had sent her a document to control her story. Now she was going to write one that ended it. By the afternoon, Sophie Bennett had stopped feeling like she was in the middle of a family crisis. It felt more like exposure, like something hidden for years was finally being pulled into daylight. Her response summary document had grown into a full structured file on her laptop. Clean sections, bullet points, attached screenshots, notes cross-referenced with the original 13-page claim. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was documenting, and every line she added made the original document look weaker, more desperate, less powerful. At 3:17 p.m., her phone rang again. This time, she already knew who it was. Her mother, Elaine Bennett. Sophie stared at the screen for a moment, then answered. Hello. Her mother's voice came immediately, tight and emotional. Sophie, what are you doing? Sophie stayed calm. I'm responding. Elaine let out a shaky breath. You've involved lawyers. You've made this so cold. Sophie leaned back in her chair. You sent me a legal invoice for my childhood. A pause. That's not how it was meant. Then how was it meant? Sophie interrupted gently. Silence. That silence told her everything. Elaine didn't have a better explanation. She just had feelings. Sophie continued softly. You don't get to hide behind emotion after choosing legal language first. Her mother's voice cracked slightly. We just wanted you to understand what we went through raising you. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, and for the first time, there was no anger left in her voice. Only clarity. You didn't raise me, she said quietly. You managed me. Another pause. Then Elaine whispered, That's not fair. Sophie opened her eyes. Neither is life, she thought. But she didn't say it. Instead, she said, I didn't choose favoritism. I didn't choose neglect. And I didn't choose to be valued only when I was useful. Her voice stayed steady. But I am choosing something now. Elaine hesitated. What are you choosing? Sophie looked out the window. Rain had started again. Soft, steady, final, distance, she said. A long silence followed. Then Elaine said something unexpected. You're really going to destroy this family over pride? Sophie almost smiled, because that was the narrative again. Always her responsibility. Always her fault. Always her burden. No, Sophie said calmly. The family was already broken. I'm just no longer pretending it isn't. The line went quiet. Then her mother said something softer, almost pleading. Sophie, please. We can fix this. That word, fix, as if she was a mistake, as if everything she felt was an error to be corrected. Sophie stood up slowly. She walked to the window and watched a couple crossing the street under umbrellas. Normal life. Peaceful life. A life she had built without them. I've spent my entire life trying to be fixed by people who never saw me as whole, she said quietly. I'm done with that. Elaine's breathing became uneven on the line. You're my daughter, she said. Sophie closed her eyes for a second, then replied gently, and you were my mother. A pause. That sentence landed differently, because it didn't accuse. It didn't argue. It simply acknowledged reality. Then Sophie said the final thing. But I don't owe you access to my life anymore. Silence. Heavy. Final. Then the call ended. Sophie didn't even check if her mother hung up first. She just set the phone down and stood there for a long moment. Something inside her had fully detached now. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Just separation. She returned to her laptop, opened her file, and added one final line to her response document. No further communication required. All matters considered closed. She paused, looked at it, then pressed save. Outside, Seattle kept moving like nothing had changed. But inside Sophie's apartment, everything had. The final email came on a Friday morning. Sophie Bennett saw it the moment she opened her laptop. Subject line: Final attempt to resolve family matter. She didn't rush to open it. She already knew the tone, the pattern, the intention. Still, she clicked it. It was from the lawyer again. Short this time. No legal formatting. No numbered sections. Just pressure. It stated that her parents were deeply distressed, that they were willing to withdraw financial claims if Sophie agreed to a private family discussion, and that continued refusal would be seen as irreversible rejection. Sophie leaned back in her chair. So that was it. The final move. Not law. Not money. Emotional leverage. Again. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was done being pulled into cycles that never changed. Then she stood up, walked to her kitchen, made coffee slowly, as if nothing on the internet mattered. Luna jumped onto the counter, rubbing against her arm. Sophie smiled faintly and scratched behind her ears. Yeah, she whispered. We're done with that, aren't we? Her phone rang again. This time, she didn't hesitate. A no number. She answered. A new voice. Her father, Richard Bennett. No greeting. No warmth. Just anger trying to sound controlled. You're really going to take this far? He said. Sophie stayed quiet. He continued. We offered to end this. All you had to do was talk. Sophie sipped her coffee slowly, then said calmly, You sent a legal invoice for my existence. Her father scoffed. That's not what it was. Sophie walked toward the window. Seattle was bright now. Clear. Almost peaceful. It's exactly what it was, she said softly. A transaction, not a relationship. Richard's voice sharpened. We gave you everything. Sophie paused, then replied, No, you gave me conditions. Silence on the line, a different kind of silence this time, because there was nothing left to twist, no argument left to win, just truth sitting between them. Richard lowered his voice. You're making a mistake. Sophie nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. No, she said gently. I already made it once. I stayed too long trying to earn love that was never offered freely. Another pause. Then her father said something quieter, more uncertain. This is still your family. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, then answered honestly. No, she said. This is my origin, not my home. Silence. Long, heavy, final, and for the first time, Richard didn't have a reply ready. Sophie continued softly. If you wanted a daughter, you should have treated me like one, not a liability, not a problem, not a line in a budget. No interruption came, only breathing on the other end. Then Sophie said the last sentence. Calm, clear, finished. I'm not participating in this anymore. And she ended the call. This time, there was no follow-up message. No lawyer email immediately after. No correction. Just silence. Real silence. Days passed. Then a week. Nothing came. No new documents. No threats. No attempts to reopen the door. And slowly, Sophie realized something strange. The absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. One Sunday morning, she sat on her couch with coffee in hand, watching lights spill through her window. Luna curled beside her. Her phone lay untouched. No anxiety, no waiting, no anticipation of disruption, just peace. And in that quiet moment, Sophie understood the truth she had been circling for weeks. Her parents hadn't lost her. They had released her. And she had finally stopped holding on. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because love that arrives as invoices, threats, and negotiations isn't love. It's control. Sophie took a slow breath, then whispered to herself, I'm not their daughter on paper anymore. She smiled faintly, just in life. And for the first time in years, that was enough.